Okay.
So I'll get started. And my first book is called When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. So this book has been getting a lot of buzz recently, and it's hit the New York Times, USA Today, and indie bestseller books. And the author is actually a romance writer. That's what she's most well known for. And this is her first thriller. And it's been described as Rear Window meets Get Out, which is that movie that came out a couple years ago, which I found really scary and I couldn't finish watching. So, so this book was a little outside of my comfort zone. I did find it a little creepy, but so what it's about a girl named Sydney Green, and she's recently gone through a difficult breakup, and so she decides to move back to her Brooklyn neighborhood from the West Coast to look for the comfort of family and the familiar. But when she gets home, she realizes that everything is changing. For sale signs are popping up all over her old neighborhood. Condos are sprouting up like weeds, and the neighbors that she's known all of her life are suddenly disappearing from the block without even saying goodbye. To hold on to the community's past and present, she decides to host a neighborhood walking tour. It's in Brooklyn and all the brownstone homes. So she wants to do this walking tour, and she finds an unlikely and unwanted assistant and someone who's recently new to the neighborhood, this guy called Theo. So and as they research Brooklyn and the history, they discover that maybe not everyone in the neighborhood is moving to the suburbs after all. So the story alternates between the viewpoints of Sydney, who's an unreliable narrator, she's going through a lot besides this breakup, and Theo, who's definitely hiding some information as well. So this isn't an easy read because it tackles the issues and victims of neighborhood gentrification and revitalization, but it will swiftly suck you in and keep you guessing until the very end.
My first book was a historical fiction. It was set in a Dublin hospital during the 1918 flu pandemic, so I thought it would be interesting to see how they handled it a little bit. And while they do cover the fact that the pandemic is causing hospitals to overflow, their disinfectants are running low, there's instructions posted to stay indoors if possible, and people are wearing masks, this still is only the backdrop to the story. Julia is a maternity nurse, and she is striving to save the lives of her pregnant patients that are not only delivering babies, some of them having difficult times, they also have the flu. And it's one of those ones where it will either hit them right away and they crash really soon, or it's one of the slow developing symptoms. They're not really sure who's going to get it and who's not. She has 3 patients at a time, and they are working in a converted storeroom because the hospital is overbooked. There's a lot of rich details in the mood and the processes that go on in this room. The author gives a lot of detail about the disinfecting processes of the time, which are very different than ours, and you kind of cringe a little bit. The medical treatment is very different. They were given hot whiskey or hot lemonade for nerves. Chloroform was used during the labor, though sparingly, so not to affect the baby, but it's very graphic when they get to the disinfecting procedures and also the labor. So if you have zero interest in learning the medical procedures, I might stay away, because sometimes I was like, this is a lot, but it was still interesting to learn those things. But there was just the practices back then were a lot different. So you can get, if you're too crazy about medical stuff, you could just skip it. But the women in the ward, they come from very different backgrounds. Some are wealthy and many are poor. There's Sister Luke, who is the nurse who relieves Julia after her shift, and she shows prejudice against women of particular backgrounds, demonstrating the classism during this time. During the shifts, we learn about Julia, and she is lucky enough to have a volunteer, Brittany, to help her during these crazy times. Brittany comes from a poor background, and she lives in a convent where the nuns take care of those without parents, but they're barely taken care of, and Brittany has no family, and she's very lonely. But she's very enthusiastic to learn new things and soon becomes indispensable to Julia. Their friendship is one of the focal points of the story as they become close working under their stressful conditions. They suffer the losses of babies and mothers together, and the author focuses on the sisterhood bonds that form during wartime versus where most novels, you know, we always learn about the brotherhood of wartime. This focuses on the sisterhood. And all the while people are at war, and having babies, but they're still dying daily from the flu. So working in these conditions, are Julie and Brittany safe themselves? And that's what you have to find out. There's a lot of sadness in the story, but a good comes out at the end.
Okay, on a little bit of a lighter note, my next book is called You Had Me at Hola, or Hola, by Alexis Daria. This is a romance title, and it's set in the drama-filled world of streaming television and telenovelas. I thought it was the perfect combination of fun and spicy, and the main and supporting characters were all fun and very memorable. So after a very messy public breakup, soap opera darling Jasmine Lynn Rodriguez finds her face splashed across the tabloids. So she leaves California and decides to return to her hometown of New York City to film the starring role in a new bilingual romantic comedy for the #1 streaming service in the country, which I just assume was Netflix. And Jasmine wants to start a new leading lady plan for herself to get out of the background characters and try to put this tabloid mess behind her. So this new leading lady plan is to get her career back on track. But unfortunately, there's a casting shakeup on her new show, and it pairs her romantic lead in the show with a telenovela hunk named Ashton Suarez, who's like an icon in the telenovela world. So, and then you learn about Ashton and his character, and as his last character on his last telenovela show was killed off, he's worried that his career is dead in the water as well. So he joins this cast of this new streaming service romance show, and he's really hoping that it will introduce him to the American audience and start getting himself on the radar of Hollywood casting. So in order to make it work, though, he really needs to generate a really great on-screen chemistry with Jasmine. Unfortunately, their first meetup was very disastrous, and it smothers, whatever chemistry that they might have had. So both with their careers on the line, Jasmine and Ashton agreed to rehearse their roles in private, but rehearsal leads to kissing, and kissing leads to behind-the-scenes romance worthy of a soap opera. So while their on-screen performance improves, the media spotlight on Jasmine soon threatens to destroy her new image and expose the secret that Ashton has that he's been hiding all along. So I thought this was a fun, easy read, and I definitely find myself reading a lot more romances this past summer. So this was one of my favorites.
Okay, my next one is a contemporary thriller. It's set on a remote island in Ireland, and even though it's contemporary, it has a very Gothic feel with the tall cliffs and rolling waves that crash into the rocks and a storm that is brewing the weekend of a wedding. Jules is a very successful woman that owns her own magazine and is physically perfect in every way. She is marrying Will, a reality star who also seems perfect. They are quite the power couple, and they haven't known each other that long, but they knew they were just meant to be. They are a bit pretentious, as are some of their guests as they start arriving. And when I was reading this book, I almost put it down, but it's so popular and everyone's loving this book, so I felt like I should keep reading, and it was worth keep reading. There's some really good twists that she throws in there. So let's see. Will's old prankster classmates stand out as guests, as well as Jules' sister, who is the maid of honor, and she's deeply depressed and nobody knows why. Jules begins to receive notes urging her not to marry her husband, Will, but she doesn't know why. She doesn't look into it too much. She kind of ignores it and thinks, well, I'll be fine. Little does anyone know that there are lots of secrets between guests and in their past, and while they have no one knows though that all of these secrets that all these people have one thing in common. So on the wedding night, someone is murdered. The chapters lead up to the murder, alternating between characters' point of view, past experiences, and they are very good at judging up the suspense as you read, trying to figure out who died, why they died, and who did it. Because you don't get all of that information up front, you just know that somebody died. The characters do not really make this novel because they are generally not very likable, but the suspense turning pages and one twist after another will keep you on the edge of your seat.
You review.
I can't hear.
I think you're breaking up a little bit, Carol. We couldn't hear your question.
Oh, I read that book briefly.
Did you like it?
So fast because it's a bestseller.
Yeah.
It was a little hard to get into, but
Yeah, right. It was.
Okay, my next book is called All Adults Here by Emma Straub. This is an author that some of you might be familiar with. She wrote The Vacationers and Modern Lovers. So this is a novel about the life cycle of one family as the kids become parents, grandchildren become teenagers, and a matriarch confronts the legacy of her mistakes. Astrid Strick is the main character and the matriarch of this family. And in the opening pages, she witnesses a school bus accident in the center of her small town. And this accident jostles loose a repressed memory from her young parenting days decades earlier. And suddenly Astrid realizes that she was not quite the parent she thought she'd been to her 3 now grown children, but to what consequence? Astrid's youngest son is drifting and unfocused, and he's making parenting mistakes of his own, leading his daughter, Astrid's granddaughter, to come live with her for the rest of the school year. Her daughter, Astrid's daughter, is pregnant yet struggling to give up her own adolescence, and Astrid's eldest son seems to measure his adult life according to standards that no one else in the family shares. But who gets to decide so many years later which long ago lapses were the ones that mattered? Who decides which apologies really count? And it might be that Astrid's 13-year-old daughter and her new friend are really the only ones that understand the courage it takes to tell the truth to the people you love the most. This was a great story about adult siblings, aging parents, high school boyfriends, middle school mean girls, and the lifelong effects of birth order and all the other things that follow us into adulthood, whether we want them to or not.
Okay, my next one is called Mexican Gothic. As you could guess, it is very Gothic in nature. It's a good read for October because it's dark, surreal, and it's menacing. Noemi is a young and glamorous social girl in the 1950s, and she receives a letter from her newly married cousin, Catalina. Catalina lives on her husband's family estate. She claims that she might be being poisoned and that fleshless things and ghosts trouble her and she feels trapped. Noemi and her father decide that she must go for a visit and see what the truth is to what her cousin claims. They are assuming that her husband is just a con artist who married her for her money, but what she ends up learning is far more complicated than that. When she arrives at the Doyles of High Place, it is described as having rot seeping through the cracks that corrupts the wallpaper and slimes the ceilings of the house. There is barely any electricity and they only use oil lamps and candles for light. It sounds like a super creepy place to be. There are also rules at the Doyle house. There's no smoking, which Noemi likes to partake in. There's no going out to town. There's no going out without permission. And with the exception of 1 or 2 dinners, no one speaks at dinner either. The patriarch of the family likes the house to be quiet. It's a very strange place to be. The family used to own a silver mine, and there are stories of an illness that killed most of the workers who remained buried on the property. It seems that anyone that lives in High Place doesn't necessarily ever make it home. Noemi has graphic and realistic dreams while staying, and that's part of the menacing feeling of the story. And she finds friendship with a cousin of the husband's. His name is Francis, and together they try to plot a way to get Noemi and Catalina away from this house and its creepy inhabitants. It has a very haunted house feel, as well as a family that is menacingly protecting its history, and a brave heroine who will stop at nothing to save herself and her cousin.
Okay, my last book that I recently read is called Winter Counts, and the author is David Heska Wanbley Whedon. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this is a debut thriller, and it's set in the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. The protagonist, his name is Virgil Wounded Horse. He's a sober alcoholic and a freelance enforcer who's hired for his own brand of justice when the American legal system or tribal council fails on the reservation. But when heroin makes its way into the reservation and finds Virgil's own nephew, his vigilantism suddenly becomes personal. He enlists the help of his ex-girlfriend, Marie Short Bear, and sets out to learn where the drugs are coming from and how to make them stop. The pair follow a lead to Denver and find that drug cartels are rapidly expanding and forming new and terrifying alliances. And back on the reservation, a new tribal council initiative raise uncomfortable questions about money and power. So Virgil starts to link all the pieces together, and he must face his own demons and reclaim his native identity, which plays a big part in this book, his sort of resistance to his native identity. He realizes that being a Native American in the 21st century comes at an incredible cost. So this is a new author. I thought the setting on the reservation was really interesting and very new to me, and they seem to really leave the ending as an opening for hopefully more books by this author and this character.
My last one is nonfiction. It's called Into the Planet, My Life as a Cave Diver. This book is a biography mingled with suspense, adventure, and survival. The book starts with Jill Hennerth almost dying while being one of the first humans to search for caves inside the B-15 iceberg, which is the largest moving object on Earth. Right away, we get a sense of the danger that is involved in cave diving. It is not only her passion, but it is her profession. She has worked on expeditions for National Geographic, PBS, and BBC. She depicts some of the most exotic locations in the world where no one has ever actually gone before. She's also very candid about the risks that she takes to do her job. I mean, imagine you are alone or with another person inside an underwater cave, and their only way out is the way that you came in. But sometimes the silt gets disturbed and it's cloudy, or your rope that you have leading you gets stuck on something, and you have to depend on yourself and this other person to get out. It's quite scary. There's only so much air that the diving tanks have, and they also need time to make a slow ascent to avoid the decompression sickness, which while you're reading is super suspenseful because you're just waiting until they go to the next level and go to the next level until they can get out of the water again. Trust between the divers is a big deal. You can't go diving with someone that you don't get along with at the risk of arguing and wasting time. This book talks also about how patriarchal the diving community is and how much harder it is as that Jill has to work as a woman in her field. And it's a physically and psychologically demanding job. There's the highs of a new mission, but there's also the expedition blues, they call it. They come after achieving the goal and you're waiting for your next big mission. Hennerth is a good storyteller, and while this is a factual account of her life, it reads smoothly like a novel. Okay. Then we have staff picks. So these are from some staff members that they've been reading and they've enjoyed recently. The first one is My Dark Vanessa. This novel is about a relationship formed with the teacher when Vanessa is at the age of 15. The story alternates between present and past as Vanessa struggles to realize the devastation that this relationship has cost her over the years. It examines the manipulation of an adult to a teenage girl and how it seemed to be a consensual relationship, which is the big question. Strain, who's the teacher, that's his name, makes her feel special by telling her that she is special and comparing her to women in literature and poetry, and he gives her books and things of erotic nature. It's a little painful to read because you see this adult manipulating this young girl, and he claims that he's the victim because he fell in love with her and he couldn't help himself. And it's hard because you want to shake her and just tell her, like, this is a predator, you're not doing the right thing. And you want to save her, but she's not listening. Even as she grows older, she has a relationship with him. It's part friendship, part sexual, and they stay in touch. And years later, he's accused by another young student of sexual abuse, which he denies this, and he relies on Vanessa for support and to convince him that he never did anything wrong. It's another book where the characters aren't that likable because you want to shake her and tell her that she's doing the wrong thing, and he's obviously a creep, but it looks at a very serious issue that keeps coming up, especially with the Me Too movement that's going on.
Okay, the next book that a staff member recommended to us to share with you guys is American Dirt by Janine Cummins. And this is a book, it starts out in Acapulco in Mexico, and it's about a woman who owns a bookstore, and her husband is a investigative journalist, and they have a young son, and they have a great life in Acapulco. And the bookstore manager, because it's a tourist town, she's a little, she gets a little frustrated with, the lack of real book reader customers that come into the store. There's a lot of touristy things and she's got to sell touristy stuff, but she does meet a customer that really, is on the same wavelength with her as far as their reading tastes and love of literature. And so she really starts to form an attachment to this male customer. But unfortunately, her husband, it turns out that he is a head of a cartel, and her husband has just done a really, devastating expose on this man, this customer, and there's some horrible consequences. And the bookstore manager now has to flee Acapulco with her young son. So it's all of them trying to make it safely to the U.S. And it talks about their travels across Mexico, knowing that this man is probably chasing them and trying to kill them as well. So this book had a lot of controversy in the beginning of the year because the author herself is not of Hispanic descent, and a lot of people really felt like she should not be telling the story. But I found it highly readable myself, and I learned a great deal.
I think that's a good book too. I read that one as well. The last one is Frida in America. And our staff member read it because it's Frida, that big anniversary of Frida Kahlo this year. And this covers the time she spent in the 1930s in San Francisco, New York, and Detroit with her new husband, Diego Rivera. They were just newlyweds. The author bases her narrative on the diary of Lucien Black, a woman who became Frida's friend in America, as well as correspondence between Frida and her family. She started to see her mixed heritage, German and American, as a distinction, and she started to transform herself and her art to reflect the Mexican national identity. While in New York, Frida saw the stark difference between high society and the ordinary suffering citizens from the Depression, and she often wrote home about the poor and how unfortunate it was that her husband had to work for the rich. There are flashbacks and insights to her childhood as well, intermingled within the chapters, and also an account of her trip back to America in 1933. America was a place where her creative spirit broke through to new heights.
Okay, did anybody else have anything that they've read recently and enjoyed and wanted to share with the group?
Well, I have.
Oh yes, Mary, anything else?
Go ahead.
Oh.
Well,
Mary?
I had a question.
Sure.
And that was, you had, with You Had Me at Hola, you had indicated that it was a 500,000 book first printing. Is that a lot?
We're supposed to take that out.
Oh.
I think it's kind of in the middle, but I'm not really positive. But that's because some of them are only, I think there was another one and it said 50,000 printing. So I think it just depends. Yeah, but we were supposed to take that out because that's details that, I mean, it's just mostly for publishing reasons, but I think that's kind of medium because of the book, it was popular, where I think more popular ones would print several more copies than 250.
Okay, thanks.
Maria?
Well, I'll talk. I read several books. I mean, they were all so good, but the one that I really enjoyed, since this is September, is I read The Day the World Came to Town, the 9/11 in Gardner, Newfoundland. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but when when that whole incident was happening, when the airplanes were crashing into buildings, all the jets that were flying into the United States were told to land. To land right away and get down. And a lot of these planes were just sent to Newfoundland, and they all went there. And the story is about how the town took care of all these planes. I'm talking tons and tons of planes and people, and how the town just came together and a few neighboring towns to take care of the people coming off the planes, because they had to leave all their bags on the plane, so they had no clothes, they had no medications, they had no food, and the town took care of them for quite a while until the world was a little more peaceful. Now, this book was also made into a musical. It's been around, and the name of the musical is Come Fly Away. Has anybody seen that? It's
I
supposed to
wanted
be.
to, I'm so mad. My sister offered to get me tickets when she was going, and I was like, yeah, that's okay. And then it sounded like it was so great. So
I didn't get to see it, but I hope to see it next year. It's coming back to Chicago. I hear it's just amazing. It's just really, really beautiful. And
I listened to that book and I thought it was so great. I really,
did
really,
you cry? I cried a little bit.
it was really
So
touching,
touching.
because, all these people that were forced to land and, and it sort of just really brought you back about how little we didn't know at the time. And they knew even less because, no one could get a hold of anybody. And they were, it was crazy, but it was a great book. I would highly recommend it, especially if you need a nonfiction read for a book club or something. I thought it was really great.
It was well written. And like I said, it just choked me up, even talking about it, because of the patriotism.
Right. Yeah, definitely made you remember all that part too. It was great. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share that they've read recently and enjoyed?
I just started the Book of Two Ways by Jodi Picoult, which I've been looking forward to reading, and it's engrossing so far, but I'm not too far along.
Hers are usually pretty good.
I love her, the Something of Small Things. Now I can't think of the name.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
I know which one you're
I
talking about
love
too. That one was really
too.
good.
Mhm.
About the white supremacists, and that was
Mhm.
a really good one. Small Great Things, I think it was called.
Yes,
Yes.
you're right. You're right.
I
And then
read another book about World War II. Well, first I read the Eric Larson one about Churchill, the Splendid in the Vial.
Fun in the
Oh, that's
Bio.
supposed to be
And I
good.
thought that was very good. I generally like Eric Larson. Sometimes, like I couldn't make it through his Marconi book. I thought it was not interesting, but I think he hit another one with this. But the other book I read, my sister-in-law's book club had read it, and it's called The Paris Architect.
Oh, that was a good one.
And yeah, I don't remember the author's name, but it's about a Frenchman in World War II who was designing buildings with the Germans. And this, I won't tell you anything else because there's another side of it that if you know about that, it ruins it.
No, that was a good book. I liked that one a lot too. Yeah, sometimes these World War II books can kind of run together, but I definitely remember that one for sure.
I also read The Vanishing Half, which was good.
Mhm. That was a good one.
You know, I almost put it down at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
but then I really got into it, and it was a very interesting story, I thought.
We read her first book for a book club I belong to, but I didn't like it as much as The Vanishing Half.
I know the first one I think was called The Mothers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, this Vanishing Half has really taken off. There's so many people. We own a lot of copies because we have so many people waiting for it.
Mm-hmm. You know, I felt lucky to get it at the time because, but I request them the minute I hear about them. Because I don't usually buy them, but I wait for them at the library. Also, I ask for large print sometimes, and that helps because there aren't as many people who want large print.
That's true.
I recently got a large print, I think of The Vanishing Half, and I realized that after my cataract surgery, I couldn't get the newer ones where you can see both near and far. So I took the distance, but it drives me crazy having to wear the glasses to read now because I used to be nearsighted. So I liked the large print and I thought, ooh, I might have to remember that.
That's why I like my Kindle, because when I read in bed, I just enlarge the font and then I can still keep reading. So I'm constantly switching back the font size with my glasses on and off.
Well, you can do that too, like on Hoopla, and you can adjust the size. And I like that feature. Although I find it hard to read online, sort of. I like a real book.
Yeah.
Just old-fashioned, I guess.
One thing
You're not
about
alone.
Hoopla is right now there's the new book by Ala Ferrante, The Lying Life of Adults.
I'm reading that.
It's
I'm
on
reading it
Hoopla.
now.
Oh, it's on Hoopla?
Yeah, it's on Hoopla. So I read it. I enjoyed most of it. I thought it was a really good story.
I'm about halfway through. I'm like riveted. I just keep reading. It's like, it is hard to read. I mean, it's tears at your heartstrings, but
Yeah.
Have you been watching the other, her other books, My Brilliant Friend on, is it Netflix?
No, I haven't. Is it good?
Yep. It just brings it to life for you.
Well, you guys shared a lot. Thank you so much.
You.
What we'll do is I'll create a nice little document and share all the books that we talked about among ourselves and email it to everybody today. So in case anything piqued your interest, you'll have the little blurb and the title and everything.
Thank you.
Great.
Super.
Okay.
This was very enjoyable.
Great. Well,
Thank you
thank you
very
for
much.
joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.